The manifestation industry built an empire by removing the most important part of what Neville Goddard actually taught, not accidentally, not through misunderstanding, through a deliberate editorial decision to make his teaching more palatable, more marketable, and more compatible with the secular self-help frameworks that dominate modern consciousness culture. What was removed is the part that makes everything else in his work mechanically functional. Without it, the techniques Neville described produce temporary results that collapse back to baseline. With it, those same techniques produce permanent and irreversible transformation of the neurological architecture that determines financial reality. The part that was removed is the part Neville himself considered foundational, the part he spent decades trying to communicate accurately before the industry that adopted his language stripped it of its actual content, and the part that, when you encounter it in its original and unedited form in Neville's actual lectures and writings, makes the entire mechanism of his method suddenly and completely intelligible in a way that the modern manifestation industry version never can. Neville Goddard was a biblical scholar, not in the institutional or doctrinal sense. He was not a theologian or a minister or a practitioner of conventional religious observance. He was a man who had studied the original texts of Scripture with a specific interpretive framework that he believed revealed a psychological and neurological science that had been encoded in symbolic language by writers who understood the mechanics of consciousness with a precision that modern science is only now approaching. Neville was explicit about this in his lectures. He said repeatedly and directly that the Bible is not a historical record. It is not a set of moral instructions. It is not an account of events that occurred in the external physical world. It is a psychological drama written in symbolic language describing the mechanics of how consciousness creates physical reality. Every figure, every event, every miracle, every instruction in Scripture was, for Neville, a precise description of a neurological and psychological process available to every human being at every moment. The manifestation industry extracted the techniques from this framework and abandoned the framework. They kept the ladder experiment and the revision technique and the instruction to sleep in the end and the concept of the wish fulfilled. They discarded the interpretive foundation that makes these techniques intelligible as something other than arbitrary rituals. And in discarding the foundation, they made it impossible for practitioners of these techniques to understand why the techniques work when they work and why they fail when they fail. Because the techniques only work when they are implemented with the understanding of consciousness that the biblical framework was encoding. Without that understanding, they are practices performed in the hope that they will produce results, which is the neurological signature of someone for whom the results are not yet the established baseline. And that neurological signature is precisely what prevents the results from becoming permanent. The biblical concept that Neville considered the operational foundation of his entire teaching was the concept of I am, not as a religious affirmation, not as a statement about divinity in any theological sense, as a precise neurological description of the mechanism by which consciousness generates physical reality. When Neville spoke about I am, he was pointing at the specific layer of awareness that exists prior to all content, prior to all thought, prior to all belief, prior to all self-concept. He was pointing at the pure fact of awareness itself, the consciousness that is aware before it becomes aware of anything in particular. This prior awareness is what Neville identified as the creative mechanism, not the thoughts that arise within it, not the beliefs that are held by it, not the emotions that move through it. The awareness itself, in its pure and contentless state, is the entity that determines what physical reality the individual inhabits. The modern manifestation industry translates this into instruction about the content of thought. Think better thoughts, hold better beliefs, generate better feelings. All of this instruction targets the content of consciousness, rather than the consciousness itself. And Neville's point was that targeting the content without understanding the consciousness is like trying to change what a projector shows by painting on the screen. The screen is where the image appears, but the image is determined by what passes through the projector. Painting on the screen produces a temporarily modified image that is immediately overwritten by whatever the projector continues to project. Changing the content of thoughts and beliefs is painting on the screen. The projector continues projecting from the neurological architecture that is already in place. and the architecture produces the image regardless of what content has been overlaid on the surface through positive thinking, affirmations, and visualization. Neville's teaching about I am was an instruction about the projector, not the screen. He was pointing at the consciousness that does the projecting and describing how to work at that level rather than at the surface level where the images appear. The specific instruction embedded in the biblical texts that Neville spent his entire career trying to transmit accurately was this: whatever you attach to I am becomes your physical reality. Not your physical experience, your physical reality. The I am is the creative substrate. What is attached to it gets created. Not metaphorically, not probabilistically, mechanically, with the same certainty that a projector creates on the screen whatever is in the film that passes through it. The problem that Neville identified, and that Scripture was encoding in symbolic language, is that most people attach financial limitation to their I am without being conscious that they are doing so. They do not walk around thinking explicitly that they are poor people who will remain poor. They carry, below the level of conscious thought, a set of automatic and completely unreflective identifications between the I am and a specific financial state. When something in the environment triggers the automatic financial self-concept, the I am does not evaluate whether the self-concept is accurate. It does not consult the conscious desire for wealth and decide to prioritize the desire over the existing identification. It creates from the identification, automatically, without deliberation, with the same mechanical certainty that a projector creates from whatever film is loaded in it. This is what Neville meant when he said, "You are always in the state of the assumption." Not sometimes, not when you are consciously attending to your assumption work, always. The I am is always creating from whatever is attached to it at the neurological level below conscious choice. The creation never pauses, the projection never stops. The only question is, what is attached to the I am at the level below conscious choice, and therefore what is being continuously projected into the physical environment by the creative mechanism that operates without interruption beneath the surface of conscious thought. The scriptural instruction that Neville identified as the key to permanent financial transformation is found in the Mosaic texts in the statement that Neville translated as, "I am that I am." He interpreted this not as a theological claim about divine identity, but as a practical instruction about how the creative mechanism works. The I am is complete in itself. It does not require any particular content to be real. It simply is. And what it is, it creates. The instruction encoded in the statement is that you have the capacity to choose what the I am is identified with, what content is attached to the creative substrate, what film is loaded in the projector. The creative mechanism does not choose its own content. You choose its content, and whatever content you choose deliberately and genuinely at the level below conscious performance becomes what is continuously projected into physical reality. The modern manifestation industry interprets this as instruction to think positive thoughts about money. This interpretation misses the entire point of what Neville was teaching. Thinking positive thoughts about money is a conscious cognitive activity. It occurs in the content layer above the I am. It does not change what is attached to the I am at the creative level. A person can think positive thoughts about money for years, while the I am remains identified with financial limitation at the level below conscious thought, and the physical reality will continue reflecting the identification rather than the thoughts. Because the physical reality is produced by the I am and what is genuinely attached to it, not by the conscious cognitive content that is temporarily overlaid on the surface of the awareness that does the creating. Neville's actual instruction was to change what is genuinely attached to the I am, not to think differently, to be differently, not to affirm wealth, to become the I am that is identified with wealth at the level below conscious performance, the level where the identification operates automatically without deliberate maintenance, the level that the projector reads when it determines what to project into physical reality. This is not a practice, it is a state. And the difference between a practice and a state is the difference between painting on the screen and changing the film in the projector. Before the second half of this discussion, the pinned comment below this video addresses something practical about making this transition from the practice level to the state level. If you have been doing manifestation work at the practice level and want to understand what working at the state level actually requires in concrete daily terms, the pinned comment has what you need. The scriptural framework Neville was working within provides specific guidance about how this transition from practice to state actually occurs, and this guidance is the part of his teaching that the manifestation industry found most difficult to package and therefore most thoroughly excised from the version of his work that became popular. The guidance involves a specific understanding of what Scripture calls faith, and Neville's interpretation of faith is so far from both the religious and the secular, popular understandings of the word that most people who encounter it for the first time reject it as incompatible with what they already believe about how manifestation works, which is precisely why it is the most important thing he ever taught about the mechanism of permanent financial transformation. Neville's translation of the biblical concept of faith was not belief in the absence of evidence. It was not positive expectation about future outcomes. It was not trust in a divine power to deliver what has been requested. Neville translated faith as the neurological state of treating the desired reality as already true at the level of identity, before any physical evidence of its truth exists, not hoping it is true, not believing it might become true, inhabiting it as if it is already the permanent and established fact of your existence at the biological level where identity is determined. This inhabitation, done genuinely and consistently enough to become the actual state of the I am, rather than a practice performed by the I am, is what Neville identified as faith in its original and operationally precise sense. And faith in this sense, he argued, was the mechanism described throughout Scripture as the one thing that makes all things possible. The specific scriptural passage Neville returned to most frequently in the context of financial transformation is found in the account of the burning bush in the Mosaic texts. In that account, when Moses asks who is speaking to him, the response is, "I am that I am." Neville's interpretation of this response was not theological. It was functional. The I am that identifies itself here is not declaring a particular quality or characteristic. It is declaring the pure fact of awareness. It is the awareness that precedes all qualification. I am, before anything is attached to it. And the second I am, the one that follows that, is the instruction. Whatever you attach to I am, that is what you are. That is what you create. That is what the projector projects. The financial implication is precise. I am broke creates broke. Not because the thought produces the state, because the I am that is identified with broke projects broke into physical reality with the same mechanical certainty that a projector projects whatever is in its film. I am wealthy creates wealthy for exactly the same reason, not as positive thinking, not as a belief to be maintained through effort, as a genuine identification at the level below conscious thought where the creative mechanism operates. When the identification is genuine, the projection is automatic. When the projection is automatic, the physical reality is determined not by circumstances, but by identity. And identity is the one thing that every human being has the capacity to choose deliberately, which is the entire practical content of Neville's message across 40 years of public teaching. The manifestation industry removed this framework and replaced it with techniques. The techniques without the framework produce practitioners who are perpetually doing practices in the hope of producing results rather than beings who have changed their identity at the level where results are determined. The hope is the problem. Hope is the emotional signature of something that has not yet been attached to the I am as a genuine identification. You cannot hope for something you already are. You can only hope for something you are not yet. And as long as the financial state you desire exists in the category of something you are hoping for, rather than something you already are at the I am level, the creative mechanism projects the hoping rather than the having, because the creative mechanism projects identity, and hope is the identity of someone who does not have what they are hoping for, permanently, until the I am itself changes, which is the only change that actually matters, which is the change the original texts were describing, which is the change the manifestation industry removed from Neville's teaching when it decided that the biblical framework was too religious for its secular audience, and which is the change that makes everything else in his teaching finally make complete sense. This is the original code. The practical instruction that emerges from the I am framework is simultaneously simpler and more demanding than anything the modern manifestation industry prescribes. It is simpler because it reduces the entire project of financial transformation to a single question. What is genuinely attached to my I am right now, at the level below conscious thought, at the level where the creative mechanism operates without deliberation or maintenance? It is more demanding because answering that question honestly requires a quality of self-observation that most people have never been trained to develop, and acting on the answer requires a quality of genuine identity shift that no technique, no affirmation, and no amount of positive thinking can substitute for. Neville described the process of attaching a new financial identity to the I am as dying and being born again. This is the scriptural language he used most frequently for the specific internal process of genuine transformation, and it is the language the manifestation industry found most difficult to incorporate into its secular framework, and therefore most thoroughly avoided. In scriptural context, dying and being born again is not a metaphor for self-improvement or personal development. It is a description of a complete and irreversible discontinuity between the previous identity and the new one. The old I am identification does not gradually improve into the new one. It ends. The new one begins. There is no continuity between them because they are genuinely different identities, different films in the projector, different automatic creative mechanisms producing different physical realities. Most people who attempt financial transformation are attempting to improve the existing financial identity rather than to end it and replace it with a different one. They are trying to make the I am that is identified with financial limitation become gradually more financially comfortable, more abundant, more successful, while remaining fundamentally the same identity that it has always been. This is not dying and being born again. This is renovation of the old building. And Neville's point, encoded in the scriptural imagery he used, is that renovation is not what the mechanism of consciousness actually performs. The mechanism performs creation. And creation does not improve the existing. It replaces it entirely with whatever the I am is genuinely identified with. The scriptural figure of Lazarus, which Neville discussed extensively throughout his career, was his central illustration of this principle in the context of financial transformation. In the account as Scripture presents it, Lazarus is dead. He is not sick. He is not declining. He is dead. And the instruction given is not to heal him or to improve his condition, but to come forth to emerge from the tomb of the old state into the new one. Neville interpreted this as a precise description of the I am process. The old financial identity is not sick. It is dead. It has already ended at the level of genuine identification. What remains is simply the emergence from the tomb of the old state into the physical expression of the new identity that has already replaced the old one at the I am level. The instruction to come forth is the instruction to stop hiding in the tomb of the old identity after the I am has genuinely shifted. The tomb is the three-dimensional physical world that is still reflecting the old identity through the momentum of existing circumstances. The circumstances have not yet caught up with the I am that has already changed, but the person who has genuinely died to the old financial identity and been genuinely born again into the new one does not wait in the tomb for the circumstances to confirm the change before emerging into the new identity. They come forth. They inhabit the new identity in daily life, in ordinary behavior, in automatic response, in the unreflective default state that the identity channels transmit to the subconscious, because the new identity is genuinely what they are, not what they are hoping to become. This is the specific application of the biblical framework that changes everything about how the practical work of financial transformation is understood. The techniques Neville taught, revision, sleeping in the end, living as if, are not practices that gradually produce the I am shift over time. They are expressions of an I am shift that has already occurred at the genuine identity level. When the I am has genuinely died to the old financial identification and been genuinely born into the new one, revision is not a practice performed in the hope of shifting something. It is the natural activity of a consciousness that processes daily experience from within a new financial identity and therefore automatically revises experience through the lens of that identity. When the I am has genuinely shifted, sleeping in the end is not a technique requiring deliberate execution. It is the natural state of a consciousness that is simply what it is when it releases deliberate direction and allows the genuine identity to operate through the withdrawn filters without interference. The techniques become natural expressions of the new identity rather than practices performed by the old identity in the hope of acquiring the new one. This is the crucial distinction that the biblical framework makes possible and that the technique-focused manifestation industry cannot communicate because it has discarded the framework. Techniques performed by the old identity in the hope of acquiring the new one carry the neurological signature of someone who does not have what they are practicing toward. The I am that is performing the technique is still identified with not having. And the creative mechanism projects not having regardless of the content of the technique being performed. Neville's teaching in its original and unedited form is not a set of techniques for producing financial transformation. It is a description of a genuine identity transformation that, when it occurs, makes certain practices natural expressions of the new identity, which is when those practices produce the external results that the manifestation industry promises can be produced by performing them from within the old identity. The question of how the genuine I am shift actually occurs, how the old financial identity genuinely ends and the new one genuinely begins, is the question that Neville addressed most directly and that the manifestation industry found least compatible with its product model, because the answer is not a technique, it is a surrender. The old identity ends when it is no longer defended. When the consciousness stops actively confirming and reinforcing the old financial self-concept by treating the physical evidence of financial limitation as authoritative feedback on what the I am actually is. The moment the consciousness withdraws its confirmation from the old identification begins to dissolve. Not because something new has been forcefully installed, because the old one is no longer being maintained by the continuous confirmatory signal that every act of accepting financial limitation as biographical truth provides. Neville described this as dying to the old self, not killing it through effort, not overcoming it through willpower, dying to it by withdrawing from it, ceasing to confirm it, ceasing to feed it with the confirmatory signal that every automatic acceptance of financial limitation as the permanent truth of the I am provides. The old financial identity is not a fixed structure that requires enormous force to dismantle. It is a pattern that requires continuous confirmation to maintain. When the confirmation is withdrawn, the pattern begins to dissolve on its own, because it has no independent existence apart from the consciousness that is confirming it by treating it as genuinely true. Stop confirming it, genuinely and completely at the level of the I am rather than performatively at the level of positive thinking, and it loses its hold on the creative mechanism. The creative mechanism is then available to receive the new identification, the new I am attachment, the new financial identity that has already been present in the consciousness as the desired state, waiting for the old identification to stop blocking it from becoming the genuine basis of the creative projection. This is the original teaching. The teaching before the industry removed the framework and left only the techniques. The teaching that explains why the techniques work when they work and why they fail when they fail. The teaching that makes permanent financial transformation not a hope or a practice or a goal to be pursued through sustained effort, but a natural consequence of a genuine identity shift that, once it has occurred, cannot be reversed, because the consciousness that was identified with financial limitation no longer exists to return to. You cannot return to an identity you have genuinely died from. You can only come forth from the tomb of the circumstances that still reflect it, into the physical expression of the identity that has already replaced it at the level of the I am. The scriptural instruction is not complicated. The execution is not technically difficult. What it requires is the one thing that no technique can substitute for and that no industry can package and sell. It requires genuine death to the old identification, genuine withdrawal of the confirmatory signal from the old financial self-concept, genuine cessation of treating financial limitation as the authoritative truth of what you are, and the willingness to inhabit the new financial identity not as a practice performed by someone who hopes it will eventually become true, but as the simple and unremarkable fact of what the I am already is, before the physical world has had time to rearrange its circumstances to reflect the change that has already occurred in the only place where the determination of financial reality is actually made. This is what Neville found in the original texts. This is what the industry removed. And this is the code that, when applied genuinely at the level of the I am rather than performatively at the level of technique, makes permanent financial transformation not the uncertain outcome of sustained practice, but the inevitable expression of an identity that has already fundamentally changed. If this framework shifted something in your understanding of why your practice has or has not been producing permanent results, leave a comment with the word code, because that is what you just encountered. The original code, the one they removed, and the one that makes everything else finally make complete and irreversible sense. There is a final and practically essential dimension of the I am framework that Neville addressed in his later lectures with an explicitness that he had been building toward throughout his entire career. And it is the dimension that brings the biblical teaching into direct contact with the daily experience of someone who is attempting to produce genuine financial transformation in the circumstances of ordinary modern life. Neville called it the test of the golden rule, and the biblical source he drew it from is the instruction to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. His interpretation of this instruction was not ethical, it was mechanical. It was a description of a specific property of the creative mechanism that has direct financial implications. The I am that creates from whatever is attached to it does not distinguish between what it identifies with in relation to itself and what it identifies with in relation to others. When you attach financial limitation to others, when you perceive others as financially limited, when you confirm in your consciousness the financial inadequacy of anyone in your environment, you are operating from a consciousness that is identified with financial limitation, not just in relation to them, universally. The I am that sees poverty in others is an I am that is identified with a world in which poverty is the natural and expected condition of people, and that identification projects poverty into the physical reality of the consciousness doing the projecting, including the financial reality of the projector. Neville drew from this the most practically specific financial instruction in his entire body of work. If you want to permanently install financial abundance in your own physical reality, you must simultaneously see financial abundance as the natural and expected condition of every person in your environment, not as a spiritual discipline, as a mechanical requirement of the creative process. The I am cannot be genuinely identified with wealth for yourself while simultaneously being identified with poverty for others, because the I am does not compartmentalize its identifications. What it identifies with universally is what it projects universally, including into the circumstances of the consciousness that is doing the projecting. This is the practical implication of the golden rule that Neville considered the most underestimated and most consistently overlooked aspect of his entire teaching. When you look at someone in financial difficulty, and your I am confirms their financial difficulty as genuinely true and genuinely permanent, you are confirming the financial difficulty of the world you inhabit, and the world you inhabit is the projection of your I am. The confirmation of their financial difficulty is the confirmation of the financial difficulty of your world, and the financial difficulty of your world is the financial difficulty of your life. The reverse is equally mechanical and equally precise. When you look at someone in financial difficulty, and your I am inhabits the certainty that financial abundance is the natural and expected condition of that person, regardless of what the current circumstances appear to be confirming, you are operating from a consciousness that is identified with a world in which financial abundance is the natural and expected condition of people, including you. The projection of that identification into physical reality is the projection of a world in which financial abundance is the natural and expected condition, and the world that is projected is the world you inhabit. Neville summarized this with a directness that he rarely applied to other aspects of his teaching. He said your concept of others is your concept of yourself, not similar to, not related to, identical. The I am does not maintain different identifications for self and other. It maintains a single identification with the nature of reality, and the nature of reality it identifies with is what gets projected into the physical world that the consciousness inhabits. This means that the most direct path to a genuine I am shift toward financial abundance is not to work exclusively on your own financial self-concept in isolation from your perception of the financial reality of everyone else. It is to inhabit the consciousness that sees financial abundance as the natural expectation for all consciousness everywhere, which is simultaneously the consciousness that sees it as the natural expectation for you, because you are not separate from all consciousness everywhere. You are the consciousness that is doing the seeing, and what it sees as natural is what it projects as real. This is the complete teaching. The I am that was identified with limitation, genuinely and completely replaced by the I am that is identified with abundance, for self and others simultaneously, projecting the new identification into physical reality through the creative mechanism that has always operated without pause, and producing the financial circumstances that accurately reflect the genuine identity of the consciousness that is doing the creating. Not someday, not eventually, mechanically. As inevitably as a projector produces on the screen whatever is in the film that is currently passing through it. This is the original code. This is what Neville found in the texts that encoded this knowledge in symbolic language centuries before the vocabulary of neuroscience existed to describe it directly. And this is the code that the manifestation industry removed when it decided that the biblical framework was too inconvenient for its product model. The code is here. It has always been here, and it works exactly as Neville said it works, for anyone who is willing to apply it at the level where it actually operates.